It's a little crazy to think that Chicago and its suburbs are so close in proximity because honestly, they sometimes can feel like completely different worlds. The city and its suburbs are vastly different in terms of the lifestyle they offer, the schools, the opportunities, the overall feel, that if you're looking to move into this area, you might be a little torn on whether you should be moving into Chicago or looking into its suburbs. Well, I've had the pleasure to live in both, so in this video, we're gonna go over the differences, the pros and cons of living in Chicago or its suburbs, so that hopefully by the end of the video, you'll have a much better idea of which one's a better fit for you. Hi, my name is Peter and I'm a realtor here in the Chicagoland area. If you're looking to move in or if you're looking to move out and need some assistance, feel free to touch base. My contact info is down below. I'm sure that my team and I can assist you. The first factor that I want to go over is the cost of living. And more specifically, it's actually the cost of housing that I want to touch on because in most people's cases, this is going to be their biggest expense. Now, in most suburbs, $400,000 will probably get you a fairly decent 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home that has a yard in a good neighborhood and some solid bones. Now, when you look at what $400,000 will get you in the city, especially in the neighborhoods closest to or in downtown, the picture looks very different. Chances are that'll only be able to get you maybe a 2-bedroom condo with fairly decent upgrades, maybe about 1,200 square feet, and there's a good chance that it might not even include parking. On top of that, you'll probably have a fairly hefty HOA fee because most of your housing options here are going to be high-rise condos. Now, sure, you can move to neighborhoods that are slightly further away from the cost of downtown where the cost of housing is lower. However, you begin to lose some of the benefits that you'd get by living in the city. Now, this doesn't only apply to purchasing real estate, but also on the rental side, because rentals are also going to be more expensive in Chicago. Now, outside of cost of housing, you'll also find that things like groceries, shopping, restaurants, pharmacy stores, all of that are going to be a little bit more expensive as well. And a lot of that has to do with sales tax, but also just because the prices are a little higher here. There's more people, it's more dense, and thus there's more demand. One thing also worth mentioning is that not even are things more expensive, but the temptation to buy them is also a lot higher. When I lived in the suburbs, I realized I didn't actually spend that much money on a day-to-day basis. But then once I moved into the city, all of a sudden I'd be spending more not only on groceries, but on restaurants, on attractions, and countless other things that I wanted to do or my friends wanted to do, and I was joining in on that. So there's definitely a lot more of a temptation to spend money here in the city. And if you're somebody that really likes to keep a tight budget, doesn't want those temptations, then chances are you might lean towards the suburbs a little bit more. As it probably doesn't come to any surprise, the cost of living in Chicago is going to be more than it is in the suburbs. So of course, this depends on what your income levels are, what you're comfortable spending, and how strict you are with your budget. But generally speaking, you're gonna get more bang for your buck living in the suburbs. Okay, the next factor I wanna go over is transportation. And here's the way I look at it. In both Chicago and its suburbs, everything is just about 15 minutes away. But in Chicago, that's on foot, and in the suburbs, that's by car. Chicago is one of the most walkable cities in the country. And the closer you live to its downtown, the more you realize that you can access nearly all of its amenities by foot. What makes that even better is that Chicago also has a fairly decent public transit system through buses and trains. So if you do live further from the downtown, you can easily get to it, or you can travel in between neighborhoods. It's really nice and actually makes living here without a car totally feasible. Now, the suburbs are a completely different story because they are more car-centric and less dense. Sure, every town will have their fair share of grocery stores, amenities, attractions. However, chances are that you won't be able to get to these on foot and you'll have to rely on a car instead. Now, there is a fairly decent metro system that goes out to the suburbs. However, the way the tracks are laid out, it makes getting in between suburbs very difficult. Instead, these are more meant for going into and out of the city. That being said, for those that live in the suburbs but work in Chicago, I highly recommend taking the metro as opposed to driving, where the traffic, especially during rush hour, can be unbearable at times. So the bottom line is this: if you live in the suburbs, you're going to need a car. But if you live in Chicago, it's more case by case and completely up to your preference, because you can get around and get along just fine without a car in the city. Okay, the next factors that I want to discuss are schools and job opportunities, because in my experience, these are typically the biggest reasons why people move either into the city or into the suburbs. Now, overall, I would say that the Chicagoland area has some of the best K-12 education in the entire country, and this applies to both Chicago and its suburbs. However, the way the schools function are a little different, and they definitely have a learning curve, especially in the city. In Chicago, the school system can be a little confusing, and it's definitely more costly. That's because some of the best schools are private. They're either charter schools or Montessori schools or various other kinds of schools that usually have some sort of testing requirements that students need to take to not only get enrolled, but as you could probably imagine, they also cost more. Now, there are some pretty decent Chicago public schools. However, these are a little spotty and it depends on the neighborhood, and typically the high-performing public schools are in the really expensive neighborhoods. Now, in the suburbs, the school process is a lot more streamlined because the public school system is really, really strong. In fact, it was recently announced that 10 of the top 50 high schools in the country were right here in the Chicago suburbs. So naturally, it makes it a whole lot easier for families when they don't have to worry about their children applying and getting into certain schools, and it's definitely a lot easier on their wallets as well. Therefore, it is not uncommon to see young families moving from Chicago into the suburbs for the school systems. Now, like with schools, you have a lot of good job opportunities in both Chicago and its suburbs. Big Fortune 500 companies located in both. However, as you would probably expect, there are going to be a little bit more in Chicago. And not only that, but they're going to be a lot more centered, located in the downtown neighborhoods such as the Loop, River North, West Loop, etc. Now, the reason this is worth mentioning is that if you have to switch jobs, change jobs, or you apply somewhere else, but you live in the city, chances are you probably won't actually have to move because offices are going to only be most likely a couple blocks away. Now, if you're doing this in the suburbs, you might get a new job in a completely different suburb on the north, south, or west sides, and it might make for a commute that is way too long, so you find out that you have to move your entire family over. Overall, the Chicagoland area as a whole has a ton of job opportunities, whether it is in the city or the suburbs, so chances are you'll be able to find something that matches you quite well. Okay, let's bring up another factor that is definitely worth mentioning and on a lot of people's minds, and that is the crime. Now, obviously, with any large city that has high density, you're going to have elevated levels of crime there as opposed to its suburbs. But that being said, it wouldn't really be fair to lump all of Chicago or all of the suburbs as one, because crime really does get neighborhood and town specific. For example, you'll find that the majority of Chicago's crime happens within a few specific neighborhoods. But there's some other neighborhoods that are just as safe or potentially even safer than some of the suburbs. I know many people that have lived in Chicago their entire lives and have never been a victim of crime, but then I also know people that have lived in the suburbs for extended periods of time and have experienced it. Overall, it makes complete sense that families, especially with young children, will want to move away from where the chances of crime happening are higher. And in those cases, I would recommend the suburbs. But that being said, the crime here in Chicago is vastly overblown, and you'd be able to live here in the city perfectly safe and just fine. Now, the last two things that I want to talk about may not be as influential as everything we've already discussed, but I know that there's going to be some people out there that will take it into higher consideration, and those two factors are diversity and the pace of life. Now, Chicago is obviously the third largest city in the country. It is a huge world-class city with a big international presence, so naturally, you're going to have high levels of diversity here, and you're going to be able to meet people from all different walks of life. It's truly amazing to get into conversations with people that all have their own unique stories about how they ended up in Chicago, and the best part is that it creates for really diverse neighborhoods and a very diverse food scene, which if you live in Chicago, you have to take advantage of exploring and trying. Now, a lot of that diversity does spill into the suburbs. However, because the suburbs are a lot more spread out and car-centric, as we mentioned before, you're not going to feel that as much. And you'll get entire neighborhoods that don't feel very diverse and entire towns sometimes that don't either. So if that's something that's important to you, you're going to find a lot more diversity in the city as opposed to the suburbs. Now, the pace of life is also naturally going to be very different. In Chicago, it's going to be hustle and bustle. There's a lot going on. Something on every corner. There's a lot of people there, a lot of events happening at all times during the day. It really is a city like New York that doesn't sleep, so things are going to move a lot quicker. In fact, if you live here, you might find that after certain weeks or a few months, you might want to step outside the city entirely just to catch a break. It's very common, happens to me all the time. The suburbs, on the other hand, are a lot more slow. It's not as chaotic, it's not as loud, you don't have as much traffic, you don't have as much people, and as a result, it probably is going to feel a lot more relaxing, which could be very appealing to a lot of young families. So if you're somebody that finds that you want a lot more of a relaxed lifestyle, you don't like a lot of interruptions into your daily routine, suburbs are more your thing. But if you like the chaos, you like the energy, you like the excitement, definitely Chicago is your move. So there you have it. Those are some of the major reasons why people either move into Chicago or into its suburbs. Hopefully by now it at least gets the gears turning in your head about which option would be better for you. Now, if you feel strongly about living in one or the other, I'd love to know where and why down in the comments, so definitely drop those. And if you want to learn more about Chicago, feel free to check out some of my other videos where I go into more details. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.